welcome to Healthwatch. I'm Cindy Berry from Ledgelight Health District. You know, we've all heard the phrase, if you see something, say something. But just what is it that we're supposed to be looking for, and what are we supposed to do if we see something suspicious that might be a threat to our safety? Today we're going to be talking about terrorism preparedness and response, and we have a great panel here today. Town of Groton Police Chief L.J. Fusaro, Groton City Police Chief Michael Spellman, and also City of Groton Fire Chief Nick DeLia. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So in preparing for today's interview, I thought that we would start by talking about the fact that it seems like daily we hear something in the news, a shooting at a mall, a school, an outdoor concert. And I'm curious about the kinds of incidents that you all are thinking about and concerned about here locally in the town and city of Groton. Would you like to start?
Sure. I think we all share the same concerns, making sure that the citizens of Groton are safe wherever they may be, whether they're at work in one of the businesses here in town, or a store, out shopping, or in their schools. Our jobs are to prepare our officers should they need to take action, but also to educate the public on what to do in those events. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at getting from us today is, what can they do?
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of concern. It doesn't seem like it's once a year anymore. It seems like it's once a month or once every few weeks we hear about an incident that's quite scary. And I think that there is maybe the misconception that it could never happen here. And that's what I hear when they interview people on the news. What kinds of things are you thinking about? Are you planning for? What kinds of incidents are you trained for?
Well, we train regionally for active shooter. It's done on a basis so all departments can, there's a phrase used, interoperability, that it doesn't just apply to radio systems, it applies to personnel as well, where you can take an officer from Groton City and an officer from Groton Town, and they're trained to work together to come on scene, and we have had to put it in place responding to incidents, and I'll let Chief Fusaro discuss it. We had a report of a weapon in a local school, where we worked very well together to keep everyone safe. Turned out to be unfounded, but it really tested our protocols, and it was a very successful outcome. Chief?
Yeah, we've been fortunate in this area because not just our departments, but all the surrounding police departments, and we've gotten the fire service involved through the training group that we have with the Law Enforcement Council. So some of the officers in each of our departments are trained as active shooter trainers, and in fact, much of the training has taken place here in Groton at some of the abandoned schools, and we have more coming in the next coming weeks with some state police assets that are going to come and do some training involving our officers. So we did have an incident. As Chief Spellman indicated, it was at Fitch High School where there was an allegation that there may have been a weapon in the school, and the first resources my department called for was Groton City, and you bring to bear a lot of people that have similar or virtually identical training, so that when that type of event happens, it doesn't matter what the patch says or what the name tag says. They're trained to the same standard, and when it's time to take action, to use the tactics, techniques, and procedures we train them on, they've all got the same thing. It is interoperable. It is a very seamless integration, and we all, I think I speak for Chief DeLia and Chief Spellman here, we don't want that to happen, but we prepare for those low frequencies events that could have really serious consequences.
And Chief DeLia, how are you preparing the men and women that work for you?
Well, about a year ago, the legal group got together and contacted some of the fire chiefs to participate and start adding EMS component, robust EMS component into the active shooter program. So it took us about a year to write the policies, get the equipment, and so as the chiefs have said, on every month, 30 or so police and now EMS folks get together and go through day-long training and practical application on the active shooter. There was a study done by Dr. Jacobs up at Hartford Hospital, and they saw that people were bleeding to death. So we've dramatically changed the concept. We still wait till these folks say that the shooter or the person is either controlled or it's not a problem anymore. And at that point, we start working as a team. We kind of transition into more of a removal and treatment process, with these guys backing us up and protecting us. Obviously without them, we wouldn't be able to go in. So it's truly a collaboration across the board.
And that's really good. I think important for residents to know that you are all three working together to plan, to respond, and to learn from other incidents that happen around the country. Let's talk a little bit about some of the surrounding area. Groton and the immediate surrounding towns might be described that there are several high-value targets in terms of terrorism. We've got the Coast Guard Academy, we have Millstone, the sub base, large casinos where people gather. Can you talk a little bit about any plans or preparation that you're working with those institutions?
Yeah, and each one of them, we do have plans in place, and that is where, as Chief Spellman mentioned, we train together, but we also have regular meetings among police chiefs and other public safety entities to go over tabletop exercises, to do some planning. And for instance, last year there was one at one of the casinos that I participated in, along with many of my counterparts. So there are plans in place. Clearly those are plans that we don't want to share with the general public for the sensitivity, because we want to know what the plan is, but we don't want people that don't need to know what it is to maybe compromise the integrity of those plans.
We have some high-profile stakeholders within the city of Groton with General Dynamics. We also have Pfizer. We have Avery Point, University of Connecticut, and we're very proximal to the U.S. sub-base that we all serve. That I think that's quite accurate. That we have those targets, and utilizing the personnel regionally that we have all have the capability to force multiply. We were talking about, we can bring a lot of law enforcement personnel to bear in that area, and the key is communications, and we all have long-standing work relationships. I worked with Chief Fusaro in the state police. We all get along very well, and the officers work very seamlessly, and if anything happens, the public can rest assured our people will respond. They'll respond professionally, and we will deal with it, whatever comes.
I know that Chief Fusaro, you lived through Sandy Hook and what happened in Newtown, and I'm wondering from you, has this changed the way that you think tactically and tactically in terms of your response to situations?
Yeah, things have evolved even prior to that. After the Columbine shooting, police tactics really changed, and there was a time in police work where, when an incident took place, officers would respond. If it was a tactical situation, they'd wait for the SWAT team to arrive and then let the SWAT team do its thing. We don't operate that way anymore. There are certainly a time and a place, and I do have experience with that, but there's a time and a place where you wait. But in an active shooter situation or hostile action, we don't do that anymore. As law enforcement officers, we're all trained that the first officers get there. So, Chief Spellman and I may be from different departments. If we're the first two to arrive, we take action. And so it has changed the way we react to these type of hostile scenes. But we've also learned from those examples on not just how to deal with the first event, but how to deal with the cascading events and the things that happen afterwards. The trauma, working with the fire service, which is something we didn't initially do. Initially it was the police, hey, you guys stay out, we'll take care of it. But really, we need to get in there and do our thing and create a safe zone for them to come in and treat and evacuate people.
And working across all the branches of the services, really what we're doing is we're identifying what the problem is, we're evaluating what resources we have to need to bring to bear to deal with it, and then we're intervening and mitigating it. That, quite frankly, is simply what we're doing. When we go out and we do it, and we have, rest assured the public can know that we have quality personnel that are well trained, that will follow those steps and handle issues come what may.
And has this changed the way that you train your officers?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. The training we both just mentioned, that didn't exist 10 years ago. I'm proud to say that our region has been among the forefront of it, certainly in the state of Connecticut. Post Newtown, there were some people did take pause and look at different ways that officers can react to this, and there were some training programs across the country that came out, and police in Connecticut were very we were out in front of it to begin with, but unfortunately these situations, you can't get into the mind of someone that may do harm to others, whether it's terrorism or an act of violence or an active shooter. There are other parts that we're hoping to use other resources to identify the potential risk factors that one may have to avoid these things even happening.
So I know a big part of this is prevention. Could you talk, Chief Spellman, could you talk a little bit about community policing and how working with the community is essential to bringing down crime and to maybe identifying people who might be at risk for violence?
The same acronym I gave you is, I believe it's Dr. Melios from University of California, San Diego. He gave out a great presentation post the Sandy Hook shooting, where he talked about that as a stakeholder, police can become a gateway for people that maybe need treatment or are in the community that start to withdraw. And when people see something, or maybe somebody's not acting the way they should, we can go out and we can speak to them. We can identify what's going on. We can evaluate what we have and intervene and suggest, perhaps, that this is available to you. And then we remove the stigma from someone that is having some issues. Because if you go to the University of Minnesota, I believe it was Dr. Dewis that was saying that he thought that the majority of people, it was a very controversial report, were paranoid schizophrenics that were involved in the shooting. And whether that's true or not, but you want to take away the stigma away from that. And if we can intervene and be that gateway to service, we're happy to take on that role.
It does seem like some of the profilers on TV kind of talk about the person who was isolated, maybe marginalized, or had lost their job, or had other mental health issues, but were not known to law enforcement necessarily, had not committed crimes, so they just were under the radar. Do you think that that's essentially true, or is that theater on TV?
Sometimes that can be theater on TV, but that is a role that we do take on, that we can be a gateway to treatment. And if somebody's having a tough time, or you have a family member that's having a difficult time, you can reach out to us. We have very empathetic officers, very sympathetic to people's plights and problems, and we'll get them the help they need before it evolves into something as dramatic as it would occur. The red flags, and I don't want to speak for Chief Fusaro, but the red flags are seen long before that. And I know the professionalism of his officers and ours, that we can intervene and assist. And that's a role that we are willing to take on.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about what people should be looking for. You're out at a concert, you're at the movie theater. What should you know about your surroundings, or what should you kind of make a mental note of?
Situational awareness, I think the phrase was used before, but people should be aware of their surroundings. It's have a plan. We talked about it post September 11th, that if something happens, you should have a plan. You should have an idea. If you're going into a crowded area, you're going to a large sporting event, make sure your family knows there's an area to go to if something happens. But also just try to reduce those vulnerabilities. If we've been trained now in our society, if you go to an airport and you see a bag sitting there, that somebody's going to say something about it. That should go in other areas, just like Chief Spellman had said. If there's someone who's exhibiting some behaviors that just seem out of character, may not be criminal, they may not be indications of terrorism, but you just may not know what it is, bring it to someone's attention and let people that have been trained to deal with it. But try to reduce the vulnerabilities, try to be aware of your surroundings, have a plan if something does happen, how to evacuate you and your family members.
I think people are looking for the exit signs when they go places now a little bit more than they used to.
And they should. And if something really bad does happen, we deal with it differently than we did before, which is, there's DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, put out a video about run, hide, fight. If you're in a building where something happens, you hear gunshots, what do? You don't freeze, you get out of that situation. If you can't get out of that situation, you hide from it. You try to take your loved ones, you put them somewhere where they can't easily be found. And if, God forbid, it comes right down to it where you're face to face with an assailant, protect yourselves. Do what you can, use what means available to protect yourself and your loved ones.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back. We'll break that down a little bit and give some people some action steps, if that's okay. All right, thank you, and stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Eva Marie smoked 12,000 packs of cigarettes over 15 years. She quit, and now there's a new lung cancer screening that could save her life. You stopped smoking. Now start screening. No matter how much you smoked, early detection could save you. Talk to your doctor or learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Welcome back to Healthwatch. We're talking today about terrorism preparedness and response. And our guests today are Groton Town Police Chief Louis Fusaro, Groton City Police Chief Michael Spellman, and Groton City Fire Chief Nick DeLia. We were talking before we went on to the break about run, hide, fight. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. We're just briefly discussing on the break that these active shooter or these situations are typically very short in duration. It's a matter of a few minutes. Anything that people can do to get themselves to a safe area, the run part, get them out of the hazard, get them away from the threat, get them away from the person that's doing the active shooting, the active killing, get out of that environment. Second, hide, delay, find some ways to lock yourself in an area where someone can't get into it, or if you can't lock yourself in, get to an area where you're not immediately apparent that you're hiding, you're secreting yourself somewhere else. And the third part is if those two things didn't work and it really comes down to it, develop a hasty plan and commit to that plan. If someone comes in, use a weapon of opportunity to protect yourself, to defeat that assailant. But it can't be a half measure. It has to be something that you're committed to. And also, make yourself known to police. And that's something that's lost in this, because when we interact with people in this situation, we're human beings too. Our stress levels are high. Officers are going, I'm going to want to see a person's hands. I'm going to want them to not be a threat to me. I'm not going to know who the bad guy is and who the good guy is, because they may look the same. So we want whatever that person can do to say, it's not me. Don't advance quickly on an officer. Don't put yourself in a position where the officer may perceive a threat, because then unfortunately the officer has to make a split-second decision to decide whether to take action against you or not.
No, I agree. And one thing that we hear with parents, their greatest nightmare, something like this happens and we're separated from our child.
Yes.
And how do we mitigate that? And this is something you can do as simple as going to a show locally. What's our rallying point if we get separated? Where are we going to meet each other? Should you go into a venue that there's a specific fast food that will meet that's in a safer area than the actual venue that you can rally at later. One thing that I picked up as a parent early on is a business card. Give your business card to your child if you get separated from them, and tell them, go to the helpers, go to a fireman, go to a police officer, present that business card, and I'm separated from my father, have your mother, and have your cell phone number on it, and they can make the call. Ironically, a former colleague of both Chief Fusaro and I had that happen to him at Fenway Park, where two people were a little excited getting out of the beer line, and it was very crowded. They were late getting to the game, and he lost his son inadvertently. And his son did everything that he had been told to do, walked right up, gave the business card, and he never lived it down with the Boston police officer that called him, but he ended up getting back in touch with his child right away. Those are the little simple things you can do that are everyday situations that can happen, so that it's not out of the realm of what you do normally if something really traumatic occurs.
But having a meeting place, I know that with fire, for example, my kids and I, we always knew that we were going to meet at the mailbox across the street if we had a fire.
That's right.
So having that just in case of some other threat to safety, I think is really a beautiful idea. Let's talk a little bit about if an event happens. you're with your friend, you're at an outdoor concert, you're at some venue, and they get shot, or you get shot, for example. What's one of the first things that you should do, Nick?
Well, the first thing we want to do is try to control the bleeding. Now, we also may need to leave that space, so that you have to kind of gauge what's going on. If you're in that space and you're still being attacked, then you need to try to get that person and get out of that space. If the activity has stopped, then we need to stop the bleeding. That's the one thing we can't bring from the outside. The paramedics can't bring that. In the military, before the helicopter leaves the hospital base, they bring blood and put it in the helicopter. Blood's the only thing that can carry oxygen. So, and depending on where you're shot, we have a very short time, 3 to 5 minutes, and that may be it. So it's important to control that. We teach at American Red Cross direct pressure points, but again, depending on what's going on, if that does not seem to be doing the job, then we need to bring something to the game. We could take a tie, use that tie it into a knot, and then use a pen, a metal pen, and actually turn it into a tourniquet. Tourniquets were a bad word, or not really pushed for many, many years. There was some misnomers about
losing the limb,
all those things. In today's world, every police car in southeastern Connecticut has a kit inside the car that has a tourniquet and a couple other bleeding control devices in it specifically for that police officer, and then if necessary, they could obviously use it on some other kind of victim. We're stocking up on tourniquets. The other fire companies and ambulances are stocking up on tourniquets and other bleeding control because if you don't have the blood, it's not going to matter.
So you shouldn't necessarily try to move them, but if the threat is still there,
so
then try to.
It's the same thing. It's move. If you're under fire, then you need to move. You remember from Vegas, the firing would start, they would move, and then when the firing stopped, they would treat.
Yeah.
Firing started, they would move again. Firing stopped, they would treat. So that's kind of the thought process. We got a lot of stuff out of Vegas as to kind of how the plans are changing, but the end result is you need to stop that bleeding as soon as possible. And there are programs that are coming out. Again, Health and Human Services are really pushing that. Eventually, what they'd like to see is next to every defibrillator we have in a public building, you'd have a stop the bleeding bag. And again, it would be those, and this is not very difficult stuff to do. It's just literally you just have to stop the bleeding from passing from one point to the next.
And what if you're hit yourself?
If you're hit yourself, then there's actually a lot of military guys that you can apply the tourniquet to yourself. Matter of fact, the tourniquets we use now are been made much simpler to use. And as a matter of fact, we just did this. They don't come assembled. What we do is we assemble them all up, so you can literally just slide it on yourself, pull it against, wrap it underneath, and then it already has the metal bar built into the tourniquet.
Okay.
And there's 3 ows. The first ow is when you get it first tight. The second one is when the bleeding stops, and then you give it one more.
Okay.
But you could actually self-escape.
And so should you stay in place, or should you try to move?
It depends what's going on.
Yeah.
It's all situational. If you're still under fire, then you're going to move.
And we didn't even talk about vehicles being used as weapons, but that's also a possibility. Is that something that you're prepared for?
The threat evolves. Every military deals with it. We're seeing it. So in New York City, people went from, who would have thought someone would hijack an airplane and fly it into buildings, and things have evolved ever since. And it happened. The Boston bombing is another great example. We don't know what the next best thing is. What's going to be the next threat? So, again, try to keep yourself out of harm's way. Try to identify what potential hazards could exist and try and avoid those to the extent you can.
The Boston bombing is a great example. No one else died after the initial explosion at the Boston bombing. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. Again, it's a big event. You have a lot of resources right there to be able to help. The second thing is you have 4 major trauma centers within a block and a half. So again, all those trauma centers actually reached their surge capacity during that event. But again, this is all about time. in Aurora, we had a shooting at a movie theater. A lot of the victims out of the back went into the back of police cars and they raced to the hospital. None of those patients died because they got the blood they needed.
Right.
So again, we're rethinking this whole concept, and we front load in our design of our responses. We front load a whole ton of resources so that by the time they give us the green light, we have stuff stacked up, ready to go.
Perfect.
So we can try to make that as fast as possible.
Perfect. Well, I think that we're well protected here in the Groton region. I want to real quickly ask you, where can people go if they want more information?
There's websites, certainly they can check our Facebook accounts.
Okay.
And
Facebook's a great way, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may add, too, I know we've talked a lot about terrorism, but we look at what the most likely factors are. And a lot of the stuff that we deal with, particularly active shooters and our domestic violence incidents, workplace violence type stuff. So although a lot of these same rules apply.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, absolutely. One thing that we did in the city of Groton is we invested in VOS training, the Virtual Operations Systems training, and it allows us to manage social media so that we get accurate information out to the public so that they can govern themselves accordingly. Without getting information out that's inaccurate, you can deal with rumors, because one of the positives of Facebook is you can talk to somebody immediately. One of the negatives of Facebook is you're almost too accessible, and when you're talking to somebody real time when maybe you don't have all the information yet, or maybe there's some information that you need for the investigation or to mitigate the problem.
Good point. Great information. Thank you all very much. It's very important information for our community to have. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope that we'll see you soon. Have a great day.